Like and subscribe and click the bell icon to get new video updates.
Despite its grim truths, not all the news in the climate report is bad. By Nick O'Malley, April 5, 2022, 7:30 p.m. Save login, register or subscribe to save articles for later. Share normal text size, larger text size, very large text size. There is a lot of grim news in the latest United Nations climate report, not least that by any reasonable reading it suggests the goal of holding warming to 1.5 degrees may have already slipped from reach. To reach that target, which the world agreed in Paris in 2015 was necessary to make life in many nations possible, the world would need to adopt immediate and massive measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Even then we may overshoot, and be forced to rely on unproven technologies to suck greenhouse gases from the sky to stabilize the temperature. Wildfires approaching a Greek island beach last summer. Credit, AP, it's now or never, said Jim Skier, co-chair of the laboriously titled body that wrote the report, Working Group 3 of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. Australian IPCC lead author Professor Frank Jotzo believes that such a result is now implausible. Working Groups I and II reported on the physical science of climate change and its impacts respectively. Sadly, many nations appear to have opted for never. The report shows that if the world pursues the policies that were in place at the end of 2020, we are on track for a catastrophic 3.2 degrees of warming. The report also shows that despite international climate negotiations stretching back as far as the Kyoto Protocol of 1992, emissions were at an all-time high over the past decade. But that is not the whole story. The report shows that the rate of growth of emissions is reducing in line with global agreements and reduction policies. This is clear evidence, says Jotzo, that emission reduction efforts can work. This has not always been apparent. Secondly, the report demonstrates that acting ambitiously on climate change is relatively cheap in the long term. This is partly due to the fact that not acting ambitiously on global warming carries horrific costs that Australia knows well after seasons of drought, fire, flood and coral bleaching. But it is also because, as the report makes clear, as global GDP grows over the coming decades, the costs of the technology we need to act continue to fall. The pathway to staying below 2 degrees of warming is wide open, if we choose to act. Without taking into account the economic benefits of reduced adaptation costs or avoided climate impacts, global gross domestic product would be just a few percentage points lower in 2050 if we take the actions necessary to limit warming to 2 degrees or below, compared to maintaining current policies, says IPCC co-chair Priyadarshy Shaikla. Professor Jotzo explains that the IPCC estimates that to keep the world on a pathway to 2 degrees we would need to achieve emissions reduction of about 20% by 2030. It also finds that if every opportunity to cut emissions all over the world at a carbon price of up to $100 per ton were adopted, we would reach a 50% reduction. Further, a 25% reduction could be achieved at costs below $20 a ton. Much of this reduction could be achieved at no cost. In other words, the pathway to staying below 2 degrees of warming is wide open, if we choose to act. This amount of rapid anthropogenic warming is not safe. To many people, particularly those living in vulnerable small island nations, it will be catastrophic. But the figures also suggest that warming can be held below that level and with real ambition, back towards 1.5 degrees. And the science tells us that every tenth of a degree counts. A guide to the environment, what's happening to it, what's being done about it and what it means for the future. Sign up to our fortnightly Clear Air newsletter here. Thank you for reading the Herald. This article is complimentary. Register or log in now to read more articles and unlock extra benefits. No payment required. Read more. Continue with Google, continue with Apple, or email address continue. By continuing, you agree to your personal information being collected under our privacy policy and accept our terms of use. Hide content.